Can you guys see that?
I can see it.
Cool. If I scale this a little bit, can you still read it?
Yes, I mean, it's very readable to me now, the way it's scaled.
Good, because I just put my window on top of it, so I could actually click it. Okay.
No, it works for me.
All right. I see still people joining the room. Tim, are you here? I don't see my co-chair yet.
Russ, have you received the updates of my slides?
I only got what came last night.
Oh, I just sent like half an hour ago. There's some mistakes or like corrections. Should I send it to your co-chair to upload, or because your screen is now shared, or?
He's not here yet.
Yeah. Or do we have time to upload them still?
Hello?
Hello?
Russ, this is Stefan. For whatever reason, I don't see your screen. It's indicated as Russ Housley's screen, but...
Yes, I know why. It's back now, right?
No.
I can see it fine. This is Daniel.
I can see it fine too, and it didn't disappear for me.
Oh, okay.
So I just reconnect. Well, that's probably the easiest one. Thanks.
Yeah, I went to see if I could find the slides in my mail. It was Bernie who said they sent slides.
Yes, it was me, Bernie.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Alexi.
Face is quite different from WebEx, isn't
it? They're all different. They're just.
I know. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just
exactly,
and it just takes time to get used to.
An RFC about key bindings for web-based video conferencing systems. Just keep the same key binding as everyone else.
Okay, Bernie, your slides are up. All right, let's get started. We're already lost a couple of minutes here. So this is the LAMPS working group. If that's not where you thought you were going to be, you're in the wrong place. We're going to reminder that this is an IETF meeting, so the note well applies. If this is a new meeting for you, please familiarize yourself with all of this, and please don't speak at the microphone until you know about your obligations under the note well. And this is the agenda. It's a slightly revised one because the slides I got for header protection were so long. I swapped it to the end so that I didn't need to cut off that presentation and then move to the other one and then find out we had more time. So I put the long one at the end in the hopes that we can take advantage and see as much of that as possible. So the first thing we need to do is we have a note taker. That's going to happen in the notepad, the CodeMD notepad. And I was going to ask my co-chair to watch the jabber, but he hasn't shown up here. So can I get someone to do that for me? Because the way the screen is, I could do the slides and the participants, but I cannot do all three. Can I get somebody to call out if there's something going on in Jabber that needs everyone's attention?
This is DKG. I can do that.
Thank you very much.
I'm assuming that the chat box in Meet Echo is sufficient to monitor the Jabber.
It is, yes, they are one-to-one and on-to.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. All right. So is there any agenda bash to other than the one I just described that I did last night? Okay. So
Quick question. How much time do you want for? Oh, we're at the end. That's fine. Never mind.
I just said that, Alexi. I put the long one at the end.
Sorry.
Okay. So the first four documents are with the RFC editor or the ISG. I'm going to give the chairs a second to the authors of each of the documents a second to say what's going on with that document. If they're here, Sean, are you here? Okay, so Sean's key update or key usage document is in the RFC editor queue. It's a pretty short document, so but they are in the middle of processing cluster 238, so I suspect it's waiting on that. Mohit, are you here? Okay, on the LAMPS OCSP nonce document, the AD review happened yesterday, and he posted to the list that he would address all of those comments and post a new version soon. So what I'm expecting is we'll see an update in the next couple days, and then it'll progress to IETF last call. The update to RFC 7030, which is EST. Is Michael here? Okay, that one is in IETF last call right now, I believe. Roman?
Actually, Russ, that's through IETF last call. It's on the telechat for August 13th already.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So, and then the last one is the update for algorithm ID protection to CMS. I'm the author of that one, and AD review happened yesterday. I responded to that. They were all editorial, and IETF last call started yesterday. Any questions about any of those quick, brief status updates? Okay, so to the active documents. We have 3 we're going to talk about today: CMP updates, lightweight CMP profile, and header protection. Henrik has 1 set of slides to deal with A and B. And Henrik, there we go. All right.
Russ, can you share the slides, or should I do?
No, I'm going to do that. It's too complicated to keep jumping back and forth. So just say next slide when you need it.
Okay, next slide, please.
So excuse me, Russ. Russ, I'm just going to jump in really quickly before we get started. Since you're chairing solo, if you need a hand with anything, just holler and kind of push it over to me, and I can give you a second pair of hands.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, Henrik,
Okay.
just say next slide.
Next slide, please. So the update of the CMP updates draft since the last IETF, I did update some of the topics we discussed last time. So I kept the OIDs for the CMC, CA, and array. As discussed last time, I changed the key management technique from symmetric key encryption to password-based key management technique for the central key generation, as discussed, and I defined the local key ID to carry an identifier for the revocation passphrase in envelope data, as discussed and also on the mailing list. I also moved the change history to the appendix to have the final section numbering in the document. So next slide, please. So the remaining to-dos are mainly the definition of the CMC key generation authority, which we already have a pre-registration, thanks to Russ for supporting that. So there is already an OID assigned, and I will add that to the document for the next review. When the document gets to RFC, we should update the descriptions of the existing OIDs just to also address this document, so the CMP usage of these OIDs. I'm about to complete the appendix on the ASN1 module, so I got some good hints from Russ on what to polish there. Any feedback on the ASN1 module is appreciated. I will also review and complete the IANA section in the draft. So any feedback or hints what may be missing is appreciated. So then I would say this is near to be complete from the text, at least complete, and how to proceed. Russ or others, what is the opinion of the group? When shall we go to working group review?
So I think once we have the ASN1 module, and at least a couple of us have compiled it, so we're sure it's right, it'll be ready for working group last call.
Okay.
Does anyone have any other thoughts? Thomas?
Yeah. Hi, Henrik. As we discussed about the encrypted key value, actually the content in the encrypted key, you think that's appropriate for the CMP updates, or
Right.
just the profile?
Right. So you're right. So there was a discussion between Thomas and me on how to code the private key for the central key generation as as content of the signed data. Right now it's specified as ID data, so just simple octet string. But Thomas said it would be good to have some structure there to be more precise. And for the profile, I definitely think it is worth describing that in more detail and possibly use a asymmetric key package structure. As defined, I think it's RFC 5958.
So that is exactly what I was going to suggest. And if you want in updates to just put a parenthetical at this point, it says, such as,
so
or
I would love to add a small note or paragraph.
I think that asymmetric key package is the right answer.
Perfect.
Thomas?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I don't see anybody getting in the line to speak, so I think we'll move to the next document, right? Henrik, do you want to talk about the lightweight document? Hello? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't hear Henrik.
No, I don't either.
Oh, Henrik.
It happens in person.
Thomas, could you do this part?
I can try.
Okay, because
I've been reading through it, so I don't think I can completely replace Henrik, but well, for these changes that Henrik noted down, I'm not really sure I can say much about it.
Maybe I can jump in here. This is Stefan.
please.
So I'm not quite sure what happened to Henrik. He probably dropped out of the meeting somehow. So we did some further issues that were based. This is Stefan Fries. We addressed some further issues that were also discussed.
Henrik is back, I think.
Yeah, I had to rejoin, so
okay, thank you.
Yeah,
so I just started, Henrik, so I give it back to you.
Thanks, Stefan. Yeah, so on the updates performed since last meeting on the Lightweight CMP profile, we did. I did mainly address all of the to-dos I collected during last session. So we set the delayed enrollment to optional. I added the section or completed the section on the certificate request from a trusted PKI.
I think he's gone again.
Sending audio, but I don't hear any either.
No, I think that's my audio that you see in the.
If you click on the participants tab, it shows a block of sending media, It shows me, Russ, and Henrik.
Correct. Yeah, but he just dropped out in the middle.
Yeah, Russ, do you have a way that you can reset his audio stream as chair?
I can only make it end.
Oh, now he's gone. Now he's not sending.
Okay, Stefan, I'm going to ask you to pick up again.
Okay, so where were we? We completed the section with request a certificate from a trusted PKI with signature protection. That was an open issue from last time because it hasn't been described thoroughly. Then in the Appendix B, there is a cert template which has been added as an example. That was also a change. Then we changed from the symmetric key encryption to password-based key management technique for central key generation. That was what Henrik just mentioned also for the update. There is a new OID-defined ID, IT, root, CA key update. That was also based on the discussion that we had on the mailing list. And we deleted the sections regarding get certificate management configuration and get enrollment voucher to not overload the lightweight profile here. Okay, any questions? Then we can move to the next. So there are further to-dos that have been addressed in the meantime. So there was a to-do related to the RSA key length, which was discussed on the mailing list. I have to admit, I don't recall exactly what the issue was here, but it has been addressed. So maybe we can get back to Henrik when he rejoins.
He's here.
I'm back. So sorry
okay.
for the disruption. Don't know why. So with the RSA key length, the discussion was whether we have one integer only for specifying the proposed RSA key length, or whether we have a set or array of integers, and we decided to have only one. And so I deleted the to-do from the document. We did some update on the offline or former file-based transport section. And we did.
Oh no. Okay.
Am I again gone?
No, you're back. There was a hiccup, but you're back.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. I don't know how far you could hear me.
So what we heard file-based.
File-based. So yeah, we did update this former file-based transport section. It's now an offline section called offline transport, and file-based is a subsection there. I did refer to Mohit's draft on CMP over co-op transport in the co-op section. So thanks to Mohit to pick this up and provide a first good draft. So I'm curious to hear the discussion in the ACE working group on that. I did complete the adding additional protection section. So this is to place a CMP message in a nested message structure, and therefore being able to add an additional protection from an array to the existing message. We did do some work on the HTTP transport section, and especially we added a section on HTTP URI discovery, and also extended a little bit endpoints in the HTTP transport section itself. So now these two sections are quite in line with Stefan's Brisky AE document, and yeah, so this should fit nicely. I also moved the change history to the appendix, so we should now have the final structure of the document. Yeah, I think that's it. So further minor issues can be found in the change history then. Okay, so the next topics on the to-do list is this discussion we had with the update CMP right before on the signed data structure to specify this content of the signed data as a metric key package content type. We do already have a pre-registration on the CA certs, the root CA key update and the cert request template OID, so I can add that. I have to complete the IANA section on these topics and need to think about security considerations. So mainly the topics are addressed in the content somewhere in notes probably, but I would like to collect them a little bit and put them into the security considerations section. I also need to have a closer look at the ASN1 modules section, and any feedback and help there is appreciated. Finally, apart from this as a metric key package topic, the content of the document is quite complete. So yeah, I think, Russ, as we discussed earlier, first the CMP updates should be complete, and then the lightweight profile should be next. So I'm quite confident that as soon as a CMP updates document can be can start the working group review, this document should also be quite complete. Any feedback here?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. This one does totally depend on updates. Thomas?
Yeah, I really like the work you have done with this document, Henrik.
Thanks.
And I think I had a couple of comments. Maybe we can take those after this. Or after your next slide, the signed data discussion.
Yeah, so we can, so next slide, please. This is the example for this change from the content type ID data to the key management as a metric key management package. So on the right hand side, hopefully you can read it. The idea is that we have only one as a metric key package structure, not several, of course, that we have the version 2, that we have an algorithm OID and the private key as well as the public key in that structure, so that the new key pair is complete in that structure, even though most likely the public key will also be in the issued certificate. But I think it's easier to handle if we have both here in this package combined. I don't think that we need the attributes field, but I was not completely sure about. So maybe Russ, can you say whether you think the attributes in this usage will be required?
I can't think of a reason, but the text there, the not should be all caps as well. Attributes field should, right?
Pardon? The not,
should.
Yeah, it's caps, yeah. Of course. Yeah. So that was my idea. So to be open if someone really thinks it's needed, but I didn't see any obvious reason.
Seems right to me.
Okay, so then this is, yeah, mainly the final change to those two documents. and next to some IANA and
Sorry.
yeah. So next slide, please. Sorry.
You said next, and I hit, and that wasn't the right context. Sorry.
So yeah, as I already said, I think with this update from my side, it's quite complete, both documents then. So I'm happy for any review comments, any suggestions or improvements, of course. So I need to work on the ASN1 modules, and I'm happy to have some assistance, because I'm maybe not that expert in these modules. Yeah, I will do the IANA considerations, and then would be happy to have a working group review then, not last call, so that's maybe too quick.
Yeah, we'll do updates, then we'll do this one. Okay, Thomas, you wanted to talk about something.
Yeah, sure. So when going through the document, there was a couple of things that at least caught my eye. And one was that it's mentioned explicitly, like SHA-256 in section 3.1 and a couple of other sections. And maybe in the name of crypto agility, specific algorithms should, I don't know what's the best way or customary, but have them separate, or how it's handled, so we don't end up in, like now in RFC 4210, it says SHA-1, which nobody uses. And now we have DSA and such things which are coming up. So I don't think SHA-256 will be the only choice used.
Right. So I could imagine to put such important algorithms. So I try to keep the document not to focus on specific algorithms defined, as I think this is more up to the areas of application to specify which, or to define which algorithms to use. But Thomas, you're right. Here and there are algorithms like SHA-256 that are specifically mentioned, but we could do that into a small appendix and refer to that, so it's easier to update.
So if you believe that this is going to be used for, decades, then you may want to put them in a separate document, which is what we did with CMS and the PKIC certificate profile. The reason for that is the protocol stays the same and only the algorithm document gets updated. If you think that this has got a shorter shelf life than that, then the appendix works fine. That's just the ability to update the algorithms document without opening the lid on the protocol document is a nice feature.
Right. So I guess providing a separate document is quite straightforward too. So
yes,
it's some frame, but then it will be a page or two, and that's it, I guess.
Exactly. You'd be surprised how many details there are to specify, like what goes in the parameters field and all of that. But yeah, it should be quite short.
Thomas, what do you think? What would be your preference?
Yeah, I like updating the separate documents as you've done with the CMS, etc. I like the approach, definitely.
Okay.
And then you can, we have, say, compliance with just different versions of that. The protocol document is definitely a little bit heavier. Albeit, I mean, that would work as well, I guess. But yeah, I like the agility of the separate document for sure.
Okay, so I will come up with a draft. Maybe we can have some early ping pong to cover everything.
Yeah.
and then I can submit it.
So submit it straight as draft IETF lamps,
Okay.
update ALG or whatever, of which way approach you're going to take. Since it's already in this document, which has been accepted by the working group, we don't need to go through the extra step.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Is there any other questions for Henrik? Other than why his... go ahead.
Just a tiny one. That was section 6.1, which I think RFC 6712 about the HTTP endpoints is referenced in the document. That this one, I would say, extends RFC 6712 with a new URL endpoints. So I guess it would just be nice if that's kind of mentioned that it's based on 6712 but extends it to something.
Yeah, you're right, Thomas. So I guess this could be another section in the update CMP that says updating 6712, and I can figure out which of the sections of that RFC is then updated and do it in the same manner as for CMP itself.
It's been a while since I read this document, but I think the case is you're just going to be adding a subsection to section 3 of 6712. Right? That's my guess.
Yeah, I have to have a closer look into that, but yeah, it is somewhere.
It's pretty short, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Can do that.
All right, thank you. And I think that means, I'm not sure whether Alexei or Bernie is going to do the presentation.
Bernie.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Bernie Höneisen. I will do the presentation on the... Oh, it looks like you put the old version on the screen, not the new one. Can you change this?
Let me find out. This is the one I've got.
That was done from last night.
This is the one I pulled out of the mail from last night.
Yes, but the one that I sent you like 1 hour ago.
No, the one I pulled out from half an hour ago.
Okay.
Today at 6:29 this morning.
Well, that is your time. Well,
yeah, exactly.
On the data track, there's a different version, but yeah. Well, then, if this is too difficult, we just go with this one. It's only a couple of typos in here. For example, the slide title is wrong. But anyway, let's start. Then my name is Bernie Höneisen, and Alexei will jump into this presentation whenever there is something specific, and he will enhance what I'm saying. Next slide. So, about the use case we're talking about. So I made a difference between the main use case and some backwards compatibility use cases. So the main use case means that both the sending and the receiving side fully support this new specification on header protection. And at the same time, it should also work for clients on a receiving side that are MIME conformant. And what MIME conformant means in this context is on the next slide. So basically in MIME, in section 2, RFC 2049, it says that a user agent that is MIME conformant should recognize and display at least RFC822 message encapsulation, so message/RFC822. And you do it the way that it is either displaying that message or offering to display the encapsulated data. And this is one of the things that we encountered in the wild, that causes some kind of weird artifacts, or like the inner message or the real message is not displayed at all, and this kind of stuff. And that's basically one of the main reasons why we are discussing this topic. We are discussing about non-MIME conformant user agents. Next slide. So that leads in the backwards compatibility use cases, those who are MIME conformant, we assume those just work, as I said before. And then we have like non-MIME conformant user agents, and those who are causing serious rendering issues with wrapped but also forwarded messages. Next slide. So this comes to an issue which we are not discussing at this time, but basically it's the question to what extent we should accommodate these non-conformant MIME implementations. Should they rather fix their broken implementation, or should we help them in the standard, or do we do something in between, like a proposal of legacy display? But let's go to the next slide. So this is one of the things we are just discussing in the next slide. It's about the protection levels. We define, like, we have signature and encryption. So it means first signed, then encrypted. That must be implemented on both sides. And on the sending side, this should be the default. So we should always sign and encrypt for maximal privacy and security. We also have the use case signature only, which should be implemented on the sending side, and it must be implemented on the receiving side. We also discussed the encryption only use case. We state that it's not recommended on the sending side, and it may be implemented on the receiving side. Next slide, please. So as I said, the specification is targeted on signature and encryption, or signature only. But what do we do about other variations or corner cases that may pop up at the receiving side? So we have encryption only, we have encryption before signature, we have signature and encryption, but the signature fails to validate, or the signature validates, the signing certificate has been revoked. We have signature only case with multiple signatures and all these kind of cases. So Daniel pointed them out, and I put them to the side. So the question is, which of those and to what extent do we need to accommodate those? So the queue is open.
Can I jump in quickly? I think in general it's quite important. There are several error handling cases, like signature failed to validate, if certificate is revoked. It needs to be handled in the code, whether it is wrapped in encryption outside of it or not. So I think the document should probably talk about it, but we can take them one at a time. In the other cases, like multiple valid signatures, that might be interesting from UI point of view, what recommendations might be.
DKG.
Hi, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore, ACLU. Yeah, so I raised these issues when I reviewed this draft because I think that the framing of protection levels here, it could use a clearer description of what we're talking about. My experience with working on this, and you can see this reflected in the AutoCrypt protected headers draft that I've written, is that this information is the clearest by making a very opinionated choice about what sorts of things are reasonable, and then about and saying, like, the things that do not fall in this category, we're just going to put them explicitly out of bounds. Now, there needs to be some guidance for things where the signatures don't work, but this list of variants here is not even the only list, right? MIME is infinitely screwy, and you can take a message and you can have it have a signature wrapped around encryption. You can have a signature wrapped around encryption, wrapped around a signature. You can have a signature wrapped around encryption, wrapped around encryption, wrapped around a signature, wrapped around encryption, around a signature. And when you're receiving these messages, someone is going like this. You get these messages; they're arbitrarily bad, right? You get arbitrarily bad garbage from people sending you mail, and we need to be very clear about what good guidance is for user agents that receive these malformed messages. And not just sort of pretend that these situations don't exist. And I think the best way to do that is to be very explicit about only handling a couple of specific cases, and that the other cases, we can talk about what the right way to do it is, but I think for the other cases, you reject all of the signatures, you decrypt what you can decrypt, but you basically treat it as as toxic material once you realize that the MIME structure is not one of the very small number of sensible MIME structures.
So I think there should be 3 that we need to support, and I'd like to hear your response to that, because way back, RFC 2634 specifies a way to support mail lists that does sign, encrypt, sign, where the outermost signature is protecting the mail list expansion information. So I think that should be one of the design patterns that we support.
I tend to agree, actually. We implemented triple wrap. This is what you're talking about, right?
Yep.
So I would like this to be covered, but I agree that we should clearly specify normal cases. And then, signature, signed and encrypted, and triple wrap, and declare everything else out of scope, or maybe have some guidance.
I don't know, what you just said was you disagree, and then you said support 3. Sign only, sign, encrypt, sign.
Yes.
That sounds like agreement. That's what I was advocating. Okay.
Yes, I'm agreeing you. Sorry.
All right. All right.
So that's actually 4, because there's also no cryptographic signature, which we need to acknowledge. All of these messages are going to be interlarded with messages that don't have any cryptographic protections, right?
Fair enough.
Jonathan Hemmel says +1 for triple wrap as well. I am not entirely convinced by triple wrap. If you're saying that a triple wrap message should contain elements that the receiving person should see, then I've never actually seen that in the wild. Now, you and I have different email practices and work with different email contexts, so my experience is not yours. I recognize that might happen, but I actually have never seen a mail user agent do anything smart with a triple wrap message to be able to indicate which things were added by the mailing list and which things were not.
I agree with that. I would like to help move that forward.
So
Jim
I don't know that
is waiting in queue,
that,
so I'm gonna let him join this discussion. Go ahead, Jim.
The other case where triple wrap shows up that you guys haven't talked about is gateways. So if I send an encrypt signed message, a gateway can sign it, and that can give you a arbitrary number of signatures depending on how many gateways that goes through.
So for the use case you're talking
and
about,
that is far more common than the mailing list one.
So Jim, I don't know if you can hear me. For this use case, I think DKIM is the answer at this point. And I don't think that it's worthwhile for us to try to shoehorn that into this particular draft. This draft is about end-to-end encrypted message protection. And I think putting gateways into this draft is going to make it unnecessarily complex.
Well, I may not disagree with that, but I think my broker would disagree with you that DKIM's the way to deal with that. They want to sign every message that goes out through the brokerage.
And they presumably do, both with DKIM and with whatever else they do. Right? And I think that if we make this draft, try to like, MIME structures can be arbitrarily complicated. This draft is already struggling with how to deal with the simple MIME structure cases. I think if we turn this draft into here's how to actually fix your triple wrapping UX on the receiving side, which I think I'm hearing that no one has functional triple wrapping UX from the receiving side, then I think this becomes an entirely different draft.
Okay, so what I think I've been convinced is let's do signature and encryption, signature only and signature plus encryption, see where that takes us, and then look at whether the third case could be added.
Right. I think
rationally, but since these are the two by far more common, let's proceed on them. Elliot wants to join the queue.
Russ, can I do a quick comment on this?
You may. I'm confused
So I think I'm happy to defer triple wrap till later and maybe a separate document. What I wouldn't want to say in this document that nothing other than signed and encrypted is valid. So there is a third, sort of third category of things which are not specified here.
Right. Okay. DKG.
I was just going to say that signed and encrypted isn't the. I mean, that all of these things all of the variations and corner cases that Bernie lists here, these are things that come up every day for me. Encrypted only messages, not encryption before signature, but signed and encrypted, but the signature fails to validate, or the signature validates, but the signing certificate is revoked. Like these are things that happen all the time, which are effectively encryption only messages. And I do think that mail user agents need to deal with them just because signatures will fail one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree.
Elliot, hold on a second. Elliot, I'm very confused about your request. You're requesting to share your screen.
Oh, that's not what I intended.
Oh, okay.
I intended to send video.
Okay, now you've requested that, but let's.
Yeah,
all right, I just was very confused.
Too many damn
sorry.
buttons. I'm sorry about that.
All right.
A very quick point of just a point of clarification. So the intent here, and forgive me for joining. Hey, everybody. The intent here, if I understand, is to provide a constrained profile for MIME for doing this with MIME, not to cover the vast greatness of miminess that DKG would otherwise probably have to have a heart attack over or something. Is that correct?
That's the proposal.
Okay. Thank you. That was just I was just trying to make sure I was understanding the proposal.
Well,
Thank you.
I think this draft ideally needs to talk about two things. One is if you're trying to generate a message that has end-to-end header protection, cryptographic header protection, what should you do? That's one thing. And that is an entirely separate question from if you are receiving a message that has end-to-end cryptographic protection, how should you evaluate the protected headers?
Okay, so does anyone want to speak against doing signature only and signature encryption now, and then once we get our heads around that, proceeding to decide whether we want to do sign, encrypt, sign? Okay, I think we have a way forward. Back to you, Bernie.
Well, for me, it's still open. We have the encryption only, which is somewhat mentioned in the document. Is this on the same level? What to do with sign, encryption, sign, or how is this now going on?
No, I'd say it's even lower priority than that.
Okay, good. Yeah, then we will focus on the first two cases and see what we do with the rest once we are kind of stable with these first two cases. Next slide, please. Okay, this is probably the hardest section or the hardest issue we are discussing because we have two proposals on the MIME format. One proposal is that what's documented nowadays, RFC 8551. It's SMIME 4.0. And there's another proposal that is coming from Autocrypt, so from Daniel and folks, that is called Protected Headers, and it's a successor of the former memory hole approach. I will shortly show this in a separate slide, like these formatting issues. What is in common of both proposals is that we have an outer and an inner message, which I'm showing you on the next slide. And what is important to mention here is that the original message itself, it can contain any MIME structure. There can be anything in it, which we need to deal with. Next slide, please. So a picture says more than 1,000 words. We see on the left-hand side a message that has a header, the orange section, and the content, the green section. And the header cannot be protected. So the subject and other information cannot be kept private, as the requirements for privacy would request. So what we do is we take another message, we compose a new message and put the header and the content of the original message into the content. So basically we wrap around the message, the original message, and put it to the content of an outer message. So this is basically the idea. Then the details, next slide. So on the wire, I use the same colors. On the wires, it could look like this. We have like the outer message, the red section. And then in between the dark green section, in the dark green section, we have a wrapper. This only is needed for the proposal 1, like the one that is following the current SMIME specification. The Autocrypt proposal that doesn't use this wrapper. The wrapper says the content type is a message RFC 822, and it indicates that it is not a forwarded message. After that, there comes the inner message, in orange the headers, and in light green the content. And then there may be some signature and other stuff coming. But in basic, this is how it's looking on the wire. Next slide. So we tried to make a comparison between the two proposals. This is not exhaustive. There are other things, but they are not so well elaborated that we can present them here. So we reduced it to these 5 points, which is the MIME conformance. The SMIME 4.0 proposal is MIME conformant according to nowadays RFC 8551, and with the protected headers, so like the Autocrypt proposal, it is unclear, at least to me, it is unclear whether it is really conformant, because I found some stuff in the MIME specification, which is presented on the next slide, that indicates that we need to look a bit more closer to this. LXA has a different opinion, but we will come back to this in a moment.
Hold on a second.
Then,
we have a comment. Daniel?
Hi there. Daniel Gilmore again. So I'm confused by these slides, by this slide in particular. It says here that there may be, I think it means rendering issues with non-MIME conformant legacy mail user agents. I am not convinced by that for the SMIME 4.0. I believe that it is possible to be MIME conformant to show the embedded message as a forwarded message, as an embedded message, basically. And that is a weird rendering issue. So it is a rendering issue with a MIME conformant legacy mail user agent. The MIME conformance slide that you put up earlier simply said, you had a slide earlier about what, the slide that you had earlier about MIME conformance said that.
Yeah, it's not about that. Sorry, you jumped in too early. I wasn't able to actually finish what I wanted to say. And there's two things with MIME conformance, and the next I will explain what I mean here.
Okay.
So I suggest that I continue this slide, and then we will, or we can also like discuss this MIME conformance now, but it's already jumping forth and back, so I'm not sure whether this helps.
I'm talking specifically about your claim about MIME conformance for the S-MIME 4.0 wrapped message. I'm not talking about the autocrypt protected headers draft. I'm talking about the question mark on the left-hand column there. Possibly, I think that means rendering issues with non-MIME conformant legacy MUAs. I believe that this format has rendering issues, not possibly, with MIME conformant legacy MUAs. And by legacy MUAs, I mean almost every single MUA out there. So I think that question mark is a misstatement of the issues that we have with the wrapped message.
Yeah. Do you talk about S-MIME or PGP?
I'm talking about all the mail user agents that are out there. S-MIME, PGP, anything.
I agree that we have rendering issues with non-MIME conformant legacy issues in OpenPGP, and about the S-MIME, I was only informed that there used to be one problem with Android clients, but Alexei can tell more, but it's not clear whether this is still the case.
I don't think that you're considering the full range of rendering issues here. Rendering a message as a forwarded message is a rendering issue if it is not a forwarded message.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Maybe we have a terminology issue here.
Yeah.
So that is a confusing thing for someone who receives a message. And I think we need to take that into account. I think that is a legitimate, confusing issue here.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's what this point was trying to say, yes.
Well, but those are MIME conformant UAs.
That's right, they're MIME conformant.
So there are rendering issues with MIME conformant, and it gets even worse if they're non-MIME conformant, is what I think DKG is trying to say.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, so one bullet point is missing that is stating that even MIME conformant legacy MUAs may confuse the user because it shows it as a forwarded message. Is that what you're
way we've seen it rendered, at least that I've seen it rendered.
Yeah. By the way, it should be called rendering and not rendering issues, but this was one of the mistakes I corrected in the new slide set. Okay, so there's one point missing about the issues that are confusing users in rendering. I'll take that, yeah. But should we now go to talk what I mean here with MIME conformance? Basically, in the RFC 2046 on multi-part MIME media type, it's in section 5.1. It states that the header fields that are inside the body and are not MIME header fields, they can be ignored. Header fields other than MIME header fields in bodies can be ignored. They should not be ignored, but they can be ignored. And in gateways, this is specifically, they may be discarded, and it goes on that X400 gateways do actually discard this. And as a conclusion, it says such header fields, like it is to, from, subject, and so on, inside body parts must not be dependent on. And there is where the RFC 822 message MIME structure comes in, because this kind of prevents that these MIME header fields are discarded. Here the question is it really a MIME conformance issue? Alexei disagrees on that. And the other thing is how it is in practice. How are parsers dealing with that in practice? Yeah, let's...
Bernie, let me know when you want to discuss.
Yeah, go back. Actually, yeah, can you go? Or maybe Alexei wanted to say here something.
Yeah. Firstly, I want to correct your statement. I didn't say that X400 gateways have a problem here. I don't actually know. Basically, this text, I asked NetFreed, and there are sort of couple of possible issues here. One is, will my implementation that parse these extra header fields, which are not content, choke on the ones it doesn't recognize? And the answer is, it can't, because if it does, it's non-MIME compliant, and there is text elsewhere in the document clearly stating that.
Well, I agree with you. It should not choke on that. Otherwise, we have another problem.
So choking is the most serious problem that might be happening. But basically, I'm saying it's not relevant. For implementation that don't choke, that parse and just ignore them, then if they want to implement something like autocrypt, then they will need to be fixed. In practice, I don't think this is going to be an issue. I know that you guys found an implementation that struggled with this, but none of the other ones I've seen have this issue. So I think it's slightly subtle and liberal interpretation of the spec, but I don't think it matters, basically.
DKG?
Is that middle green part? They may be discarded by gateways, but they may be discarded by gateways as a marker is in violation of 1847, RFC 1847, section 2.1, which basically says that multi-part signed messages, the content of multi-part signed messages must not be modified by gateways. And so here's a case where we have so many standards that, you know, we're into biblical exegesis here, right? I mean, yes, that things may be discarded by gateways, but the gateway will be in violation of a different RFC if they do discard something that's within a cryptographic protection. So.
Well, it probably depends if the gateway breaks the cryptographic relation. It has one between the sender and the gateway, and afterwards the gateway is not anymore using cryptography, or does a new one. I'm not sure whether we can do end-to-end encryption between X400.
Yeah, if we're talking about a gateway that deliberately strips end-to-end cryptographic protection, then we are no longer in a relevant discussion about end-to-end cryptographic header protection, right? A gateway that modifies the message in such a way that
well, the gateway just says unreachable. It's the other endpoint, and I don't know if that exists, but it may that the gateway says I'm the other endpoint and relays the message to the user unencrypted. There are such scenarios when the encryption is finished at some point of time. But I'm not sure whether this is relevant. I'm not saying that I know that's relevant. It's just like something we need to look at. Okay, then go back, please. One slide back, please, because I haven't finished it yet. Or two slides back, basically. Yeah, okay. So what is bit related to this MIME conformance, it's already been touched in the discussion, is how MIME parser proof those are. I would say in the S-MIME version, this is MIME parser proof. At least there is nothing known about, and it has been standardized for a while. And the existing MIME parser treatment is unclear, and it's also something we need to look at closely before we adopt autocrypt proposal. Already mentioned that I know of one MIME parser implementation that is discarding any non-MIME header fields when it's in a bodies, which is then causing an issue to the autocrypt proposal. It's not the particular problem with that MIME parser because it will fix it. That's not a problem. But what I think is, are there any other MIME parsers in the wild? Or can we rely on all the other MIME parsers in the wild that are MIME conformant and do it exactly as the one I discovered in that talk, that are just ignoring these non-MIME header fields in bodies? And then in particular, we need to look at the widespread MIME parsers like Microsoft Exchange, which is known to do weird stuff with MIME. Should we open discussion here again, point by point? Daniel?
So I'm not sure what we need to do specifically in order to find these things. Many months ago, I published a set of messages on an IMAP server, and I sent mail to the LAMPS mailing list asking for people to send screenshots of those messages. We got some. I want to thank the folks who did that. I didn't see anyone whose mail user agent crashed as a result of receiving a message that had one of these embedded headers. So you say we need to look into that. I think we have been looking into that, and I don't think any issues have come up. So I don't know what else we need to do. How do we know when this process terminates?
Has anybody checked it with Exchange?
I use Microsoft Exchange on a daily basis, to my chagrin. You know, I have passed messages through it. I've been the only person that, as far as I know, who has written and publicly documented some of the ways that Microsoft Exchange tampers with MIME structures, and that's in a draft, I believe. I mean, I can point folks to it on the mailing list if folks are interested. Again, the tampering with the MIME structures that Exchange does is entirely distinct from questions about whether there are additional headers in the subparts. So again, like if you want to ask for a specific piece of research to be done, I'm totally on board. But if we don't know what we're looking for, I don't know, like we can't persist indefinitely in a state of, well, more research needs to be done. That's my worry here. If you're asking for a specific piece of research, how does X type of message pass through Y type of gateway and is received by Z type of user agent? Fine, I'm game. Let's write those things down, but I don't think we want it to be an open-ended call for research.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, not related to that, but I sent some proposals of messages that I would like to check on both proposals. I sent you even the MIME structure that would need to be tested. It's more or less about these rendering issues and whether there are issues and which one does it better and this kind of stuff. And I haven't seen any answer to that email. And I agree, we cannot do research forever, but we should look at the most important cases at least and see whether we are introducing something that at the end causes more problems than we are solving by changing it from what we have there. Because if you don't change, we don't need to do this research. But if we want to change to reduce these rendering issues, then we need to look at it closer. That's what I'm saying here. If there's no further comment, I'm just going on. Next thing is probably not really condensed. It's, of course, the S-MIME conformant. The MIME S-MIME proposes S-MIME conformant by hands. Please leave the slide on where we are. 2 slides back, please. Russ, can you go? Yeah, okay. So, and it means the S-MIME needs to be changed. The S-MIME standard needs to be changed if you adopt the AutoCrypt proposal. We already talked about that there are rendering issues, or possibly there are rendering issues with non-MIME conformant legacy UAs, and DKG enhanced that there are rendering issues like UA rendering issues with MIME conformant UAs. And that is definitely a plus of the AutoCrypt proposal because it reduces this. And the last thing is it's slightly shorter in the AutoCrypt proposal. Is there anything to be discussed on these last bullet points? Otherwise, we will go on. Yeah, okay. 2 slides further, please. So now we are leaving the contentious topic about the MIME structure and go to topics that are common for both proposals. I showed here the whole message flow. So we have the original message, which turns into an inner message. It's basically pretty similar, and it will be explained more on the next slides, which then from those, and the original message also turns into the outer message. We need to do something for the outer message to wrap actually the inner message. I showed it on 2 columns because on the sending side, we have a slightly different set of message than on the receiving side because we have the trace header fields like received, by, and so on. And it may also be different because on the way somebody changed something in the outer header. And at the receiving user-facing message, we basically extract the inner message and display it to the user. So that's how this is supposed to work, or like how it is documented at the moment. We go through now step by step in case you disagree on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so the inner message, it's generally or often it's the same or subset of the original message header section. And next slide, please.
Hold on.
Is actually correct. I don't believe so. I'm not sure about
the next slide. I have the issue discussed. Can you please swap the slide? Okay, so basically the inner message is either the same as the original message or the original message without BCC. BCC has particular issues which are discussed on another issue slide. And the big question is any other variants we need to consider, and that's probably where Daniel is jumping in now. Daniel?
So I am not entirely sorry for the garbage truck noise in the background here. I am not entirely sure that this framing inner message, original message, inner message is correct, and I'm not sure how useful it is. Again, I think that this document will be more useful if we clearly separate the generating side from the receiving side. Presenting it all in one workflow, I think, makes it more confusing for implementers. And so I think it would be more useful for us to say, let's talk about how you generate this. You have a message you want to send. You're a mail user agent. What do you do? What are the steps for that? And then here's how you might receive a message. Here's what you might think about on the receiving side. I think that is a more useful structure for implementers. I know that as an implementer, I found that structure more useful. Instead of trying to pretend that the message is the same all the way across the loop. This isn't particularly because in this description, we've got an outer message that actually is different depending on who's looking at the message, because the outer message might have been modified by gateways. And the original message, when someone is sending a message, isn't actually necessarily an email structure in the first place. When you're going to compose a message and send it, the mail user agent hasn't made the MIME structure yet, right? It has a set of directives that it uses to figure out how to make the MIME structure, but it isn't yet a MIME structure. And so this idea that says there's original message that is transformed into the inner message is, it presumes a particular type of workflow. And, yes, it's a reasonable workflow, but not everybody uses that workflow. So I'm a little bit concerned that this framing is pushing in a separate, in like a you should implement in the following way direction, instead of saying, hey, when you've composed a message, here are like the UI elements that presumably you got from the user. Is this a reply to something? Who is it to? What's the subject? Are you going to put a date on it? Like all of these things that a message is about to send. But it's not actually necessarily an RFCA 22 message at that point. And with BCC, right? BCC is an example of it being the subset. So there are some non-subset transformations, right? When you make an inner message, you're like wrapping it. If you use the SMIME construct, you're wrapping that message in message RFCA 22. That content type RFCA 22 doesn't exist in the original message. So it's not a subset, it's actually a superset. Right, and then yes, there's BCC that gets dropped. Right, there's a set of things that happen to it that are distinct. But I think what this would be really useful is to say, here's the information we think as a mail user agent you have, and just have it as a bulleted list of items, and then say, here's how you construct the message with protected headers with whatever variant we go with. Right, you do the following things. But I don't think that it's useful. I don't think that this inner message, original message framing gives us anything as an additional advantage. Sorry, I was a little long-winded. I apologize.
Yeah, I tried to catch up on the points. Like one thing that the inner message and the superset, I do not consider the RFC 822 wrapper as part of the inner message. This is part of the wrapper, as I showed in the last slide. And
can you go back to the last slide?
It's the one that is showing the message on the wire. Yeah, that one. So the inner message, as it is defined in the draft, is the orange and the light green thing. And the other one is part of the wrapper, the dark green. So, but I think this is a minor point. You had a more important point you raised, which is that we may, depending on where we are, we may have no original message that is RFC 0822 message that we are just about to compose and put into an inner message. And we need to reflect that somehow. I agree with that. And I suggest that we are sorting that out later, and we are just taking it now as a feedback. Is there anything else you mentioned that I forgot to reply on? Does not appear to be the case. Then can you go back forward to the slide? Yes, okay. So then we are talking about the outer message. Probably some of the feedback of Daniel applies also to that one. So how it is defined now in the draft is that we have the essential header fields, which is the from, the to, the BCC, the date, the message ID, and the subject. It depends. This is kind of what is needed, and this depends on BCC handling and also whether or not these header fields are present in the original message. Specifically, the to and the CC and the BCC are not always present in the original message. The header section also contains the MIME section parts, like the content type, content disposition that is defining the encryption or signing or both. And it may contain further header fields like reference, reply to, in reply to, which is needed by some features of IMAP. Next slide. So I just repeat what I said here before, that we have it on one slide. The question is, any other issues we need to consider? How are we with timing? Because we didn't consider that it's a high priority issue. I think we can discuss it shortly now, and if it turns out to be long, we are proceeding. Daniel?
Hi, this is DKG again. So again, I'm not convinced that outer message is a useful term the way that it's defined in this draft, because it's defined as two separate things. One is the message after it has been wrapped with the cryptographic protection, and the second one is the message as it is received at the receiving MUA. And those are very different things because the message gets altered in transit. So I think this isn't as clear as it could be. I also note that the transformation from original message to outer message doesn't just have one layer, right? The MIME header section part. It could have multiple ones because multiple cryptographic protections can be layered on, like we talked about in the protection levels discussion. Mm-hmm. And so the way that I framed this in the past, again, sorry for all the truck noise, y'all. Apparently people are out early here. The way that I framed this in the past, and you can see this in the AutoCrypt protected headers draft, is the idea of a cryptographic envelope, which consists of layers of cryptographic protection around what I think is roughly aligned with what you're calling the inner message, which is which is referred to as the cryptographic payload, right? The cryptographic payload is an arbitrary MIME tree, and around the payload are potentially multiple layers of cryptographic MIME-based cryptographic protections.
Mm.
And
So
there's another question about, like, well, which headers are we talking about? If we're talking about essential header fields, like, those are essential header fields that are on the outside of the cryptographic envelope, but the cryptographic envelope itself is distinct. And there might be, it says here MIME header section part, but of course there might be, that's only one of the parts. Like, it might be multi-part signed, it might be multi-part encrypted, it might be application PKCS7. So again, like, I'm not sure that this frame, I found the framing of cryptographic envelope, cryptographic payload to be more useful. If you think that those things are useful, but you don't want to import them into this draft, I'd be happy to write it as a separate draft, distinct from any sort of header protection question, just so we have a shared document we can reference that shows cryptographic envelope and cryptographic payload, if that would be useful. But anyway, I just found that I find this framing harder to work with as an implementer.
I'm open to look at this terminology. I sometimes invent a terminology, I know, and to make it harmonize to things that people know, I am not opposed. So we can introduce that. And what I also hear is that it should be a bit more specific, that there can be multiple MIME header section parts, which are kind of in the auto message, that this is not too specific, and I agree with that. You were talking about these dark green parts on the other slide, like this, what we call the wrapper. And these are this kind of MIME header section parts, the inner. But I agree that we need to make this a bit more clear. And I'm not opposed to use such terms that are better understood. But let's go to the next one, unless, yeah, okay. So also related to this auto message header field is that we need to obfuscate some stuff. For example, the subject. This is the most important information that we need to protect. So we stated that it should be obfuscated, and other header fields or the other essential header fields may be obfuscated, but the obfuscation likely has an impact on spam filtering. And what is not listed here is if a header field is not essential but obfuscated, we should rather skip it than to put it there and obfuscate it if it has no use. Next slide.
This is DKG again.
Wait a second. Next slide is pointing the issue. So basically, the question is, should we recommend any specific format for obfuscation? I have here some list of stuff that I found. It's not exhaustive. And what is the impact of spam filtering? And I guess this is where Daniel is coming to. Daniel, please.
Yeah, sorry. No, my comment is that I don't actually believe that this is correct as stated, because if there is no encryption in the cryptographic protections, I don't believe obfuscation is warranted for any of these headers. And so to blanket recommend obfuscation of the subject line would be a mistake.
Okay, I agree with you. Okay, we need to be clear though. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that needs to be really clear. And again, we're juggling here between two things, right? One thing is, if you're generating the message, what should you do? And the second thing is, if you're receiving the message, how should you handle an obfuscated header field? And those are distinct. And so I think that this draft should not recommend any specific format for obfuscations with the exception of the subject line. And it should leave open that someone might want to write a document later that says, hey, we've been thinking now we know how to obfuscate one header field. Here's a proposal for how to obfuscate a few other header fields. And I don't think we should get into the details for how to obfuscate date or message ID or to or from on in this particular draft. I think it makes more sense to say, we know we care about obfuscating the subject line. The standard for subject line obfuscation is ... And, obviously you could propose a new RFC that proposes a new form of subject line obfuscation. But I think we should leave it at that. I think the point of this draft is to get the mechanism in place and not to worry about the other fields.
So, this is Russ. I worry about obfuscating date, especially. I know that it would affect the way most people triage their inbox. The others we can have discussions about, but subject is the one that has caused the most discussion when people think, oh, I encrypted the message, and then they find out the subject line was plain text and they gave away the whole point of the message. That's the one that has come up over and over.
May I reply to Daniel's thing? So we are still like on the generating side here. You said that I'm mixing up, but I'm still talking about the generating side, not about the receiving side yet. And I'm totally fine if we say that we are not going into the details of what we do with date header fields or what we do with from and to or whatever. However, I think if this is becoming a need that these header fields need to be obfuscated, then we probably need to define something to give guidance to the spam filtering, that they are not treating something as spam, or that they know that this is obfuscated and not flag it as spam based on this.
I agree, but I think that's a separate document, Bernie.
Yes, I just said I don't want to really put this in. I just want to put it to the discussion. And unless something comes up, no, we need to discuss this, I'm happy to skip this, or like just make a note that this may happen or something like that, but not as in a, how is it called, in a normative part section, if we put it there. Okay, is there any other comments to these obfuscation things? Otherwise we go on. How much time do we still have? 20 minutes, looks quite good. So now for Daniel especially, we are in the receiving side, like in the interpreting side. And this part, I made it pretty easy and said, take the inner message, throw away the outer message and display it to the user. Next slide. So this leads to two issues. Again, do we need to have something else than just display the inner message? Do we need to actually do any merging? I would discourage from that because it makes things rather complicated and prone to mistakes in the implementation. But as a consequence, the user doesn't have any more access to information he normally has, like the information the outer headers. For example, the trace header fields he can use for debugging, or like detecting attacks if the outer message is not the same as the inner, or this kind of stuff. The question is, do we need to standardize a means to provide this outer message to the user, or can we just leave that to the implementer, whether or not he wants to do it and how he does it? So there are two questions, and if anybody has to say something, please speak up.
I want to give you a time check. You have 7 minutes till the session's over.
Oh, nice. Okay, then go to the next slide if nobody wants to comment on this. This is some
Bernie, is that again, by bringing up inner message, you're back into mixing up the generation and receiving context, right? And again, I think that makes it harder to understand.
Okay, I think we need to discuss this offline, what you mean here. Or maybe you could show what is the exact issue. I mean, you receive a message and it has a defined part, which is the inner message. And this you take and show to the user. So what is here unclear? I don't get you, sorry.
The receiving user agent has an obligation to render the message to the end user. Yeah. If they render the message as though it were just the inner message, then they are not revealing to the user the cryptographic protections that apply to the message. So that would be a mistake. They have to render the cryptographic protections as well, and they have to render some indication to the user that the headers were protected or not. So the nuance that's here is that the receiving user agent's job is to render not only the inner message to the user, it's to render the entire state of the message to the user. And if we say, oh yeah, well now they've got the inner message, that's that, then we haven't actually helped the receiving mail user agent think through what they need to be doing.
Yeah. So basically, I understand. Yeah. Ross, can you go back one slide? Because he talked about the last issue. Yeah. So that is what I meant, that any other variants to consider in the issue 1. So I understand you say that we need to render more to the user than just the inner message, and we need to standardize that. Is that correct?
If I could live in a perfect LAMPS world, is that every email that I received would be both signed and encrypted, and I would see nothing about the fact that they were signed and encrypted. But when I would occasionally receive some garbage message that's not both signed and encrypted, I would see warnings that let me know which parts were not signed or not encrypted. Mm-hmm. And if the message didn't have header protection, but was otherwise signed and encrypted, I would see a warning to say this subject line was not part of the cryptographic protections. Or a message that had no cryptographic protections at all, I would see a warning that said, you know, no protections anywhere at all anyway. But we're not at that point, right? We're in the point where HTTPS is the unusual case. So we can't go that route. But the point here is that the user, like the rendering job, the job is to communicate to the user what cryptographic protections they had, and to make sense of those cryptographic protections when sending a reply, yeah. Right?
Yeah. Do you believe that needs
further? I'd like to make one additional point, building on what DKG has said, and that is the IETF usually gets into trouble when we design user interface. So saying that it's a requirement that something be communicated to the user is fine. Saying, you know, it must be a lock icon, or it must be a, you know, a red border or whatever. I mean, they all have trouble in especially for colorblind people. But let's avoid the pitfall that we know is there.
Right. I agree with Russ.
Yeah, I mean, we are in this as well, and we took into consideration the colorblind versions, so that it's not only an icon with color, but also with symbol and so on. And I agree that in the IETF, we haven't been really particularly strong in designing this kind of stuff, but we definitely need to go towards this direction. So in that sense, we need to figure this out. So
I think the message here was that we need to be able to clarify what must be communicated to the user, but we don't need to clarify how it should be communicated to the user.
Okay. Yeah, fair.
That's my point.
Okay. I agree with that. Okay, then next slide. This is something we discussed already in some earlier sessions. It's about wait a second, can you go up one? Yeah, it's about the Bcc handling. So the encrypted message with the Bcc needs to be split at the sending side. Basically, there is nowadays implementation, they have the same message to all the Bcc, correction, the same message for all the 2 and the CC recipients, like those who are open, nothing to hide. This is sent without the Bcc header field. And then there is the message that is sent to the recipients in the Bcc. And this varies among implementation. So we have one message per Bcc recipient. Basically, you take the message, take the Bcc header field of that particular recipient and put it, add it to the Bcc and send it out. This leads to potentially a lot of message if the Bcc list is quite huge. What we also have seen is that it's the same message for all the Bcc recipients. So one message for all with the Bcc containing some indication like undisclosed recipients. And there could also be the same message for all the BCC recipients, but no BCC at all, which may cause other issues. Basically, the most privacy-preserving way is to do it in the 2A, like one message per BCC recipient, a lot of message maybe. But the 2B and the 2C, like the same message for all, leak privacy information via the encryption keys and or certificates. Does anybody disagree that we do it the way 2A and that we mandate it should be done like this with header protection? And the next question would then be, what do we do with the general question in SMIME, which we are not discussing in this draft, I guess? Any comments?
I think SMIME already tells us that the answer is 2A.
Okay, I haven't really found it in the spec, but you are more familiar with it.
I'm also not sure that this belongs in this draft. I mean, I agree with a bunch of the, with I think what the consensus of the room here is, which is 2A is the way to do it. But I think this draft can be simpler if it doesn't address this issue, because this issue is independent.
It is not, because we need to tell the user or the encryptor to avoid putting a BCC into the message, into the inner message, because it cannot be removed later on.
Well, again, this goes back to the question of how this draft is structured. If the draft is, here's what you do as a sender, because you, as a sending mail user agent, you have a collection of information about what you're going to do, right? You're going to decide, the things you have are who's going to get this message, who's going to be listed in the to and CC fields, who's the message going to be from, what's the body of the message, will we stamp a date on it, right? Mm-hmm. Those are things that you start with, but it's not necessarily an RFCA 22 message.
Yeah, I got that one.
So Alexi in the chat says BCC affects message generation, so this is not unrelated. Alexi, I don't think BCC affects the generation of the structure of the message here. It affects how you generate, like which steps you take. I think this I think this is orthogonal to this particular draft. But Alexi, if you have a suggestion for how it's part of this, I'd be willing to hear it.
I don't have a strong opinion. I mean, yeah. I think it's an important topic somewhere, whether it's in the same draft or not. That's a separate issue. I don't mind.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut this discussion now. We're already a minute over our time slot. Obviously this discussion needs to continue on the mail list. You have like 10 slides we didn't even get to. Let's keep the momentum going. This topic went silent for like 6 months. Let's avoid it going silent again and make steady progress on it, please. But we are out of time, and I don't. What else is there from the authors about next steps?
Basically, is that we need to discuss these issues further on the mailing list, and I intend to put those like one by one into some mailing threads. And the other thing is that we implement, or we discuss the feedback which we got today with like how to put it to the draft. And there are some other open issues which I don't mention, that we probably do a merge of some stuff that was in the requirements draft, and also some stuff we agree that is in the AutoCrypt draft, as Daniel mentioned, that we do some merging things. Yeah.
So some discussion came up about needing to do more research. If folks think that we need to do more research, I'd like to see that clearly documented on the list about what specific research is needed, and then we can find folks to do that research.
Yes, that's what I meant, the part of the feedback, yeah. As I said, I already sent you some hints what kind of examples would be useful to test and compare with the two different approaches, and see how the parsers and the mail user agents react. And if we had that, it would make the research a bit easier. And yeah.
Okay, the audio stream is going to die in 1 minute. So I think we better wrap now.
Okay.
And let's make sure that this discussion picks up on the list. I ask you to manage the the discussion on the list, start with one issue, drive it to ground, go to the next issue, drive it to ground, and so on. And thank you all for your participation, and we'll see you on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
This means the meeting is over.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.